One modification that I'm going to need to make to this model is the way the tank's turret mounts to the lower hull. This is one of the weak points that I see with the kit. Unlike a 1/35 scale tank or like one of the 1/16 scale tanks where the turrets would lock onto the lower hull via two tangs on the bottom of the turret plate, this tank just sits in the turret hole and is kind of held in place by a bunch of little nubs. I'll show you that in a second. And here's the bottom portion of the turret. These little grooves would lock into, or would kind of hold onto this portion here of the neck of the turret ring, and would kind of sort of keep it in via friction. I don't really like this system very much, and I'm going to come up with a system to replace it. That system is going to utilize tangs like that on a 1/35 scale tank. I purchased a piece of plastic angle, and this angle will be cut up and then mounted to the bottom portion of the turret, so thus forming the lugs. On the upper hull, I will sand away two small keys on the upper plate, and this will be where the turret will lock on. The conversion looks something like this. And here go the turret lock system that was added to the lower portion of the turret. The system itself is comprised of an ABS Plastruct angle and two small square stocks of Plastruct. The reason why the Plastruct is there, the two square stocks are there, was that when I first did the angles and I mounted it to the vehicle, there was about a ½ inch gap between my Plastruct and the tank's roof. To go ahead and remove some of that play, I went ahead and added the two blocks to each of the locks. Now the turret sits perfectly with the top deck and has no up and down play to it whatsoever. Just like on a small scale Tamiya, or DML kit for that matter, the two turret locks were carved into the tank's upper deck. The two notches themselves were simply marked off with a square to make sure that they're nice and even, and were cut away using an X-Acto saw and a file. Another thing as of note was that on the turret roof, if we recall before the turret locks were cut in, there were small half moons along the perimeter of the turret ring, and these half moons originally were intended to grip the turret by the neck to keep it secured to the tank's upper hull. I went ahead and sanded them completely smooth with a file. However, upon doing this, I realized that once the turret was installed, there was a lot of left and right and lateral play going on. At the time, it didn't make much sense, because if you take measurements of the turret ring and the turret ring of the turret neck, numerically they're the exact same size. So it kind of puzzled me a bit, but to fix this was pretty much an easy fix. What I did was I took thin little strips of sheet styrene and I glued them to the turret neck. The two strips went ahead and deleted any gapping that was apparently there between the neck and the top plate. With the addition of these two strips, now the turret has absolutely no play and sits on the vehicle nice and sturdy. Another thing as of note is that if we notice here, the splash rims on the back and the front had their surrounding welds removed. If you tuned into an earlier video, you will see that welds were sculpted along the perimeter of both the rear and the front bullet splash rails. This was done because, upon doing more further research on the Panzer II, I found out that these two components here were actually bolted to the tank's upper hull as opposed to being welded to the tank's upper hull. So because of this little detail, the welds were heated and removed. The welds also had to be relocated that were located here on the upper hull. If we remember in another earlier videos that I mentioned that the welds were added. When they were first added, they were added along the roof here. However, once the turret locks were mounted and the turret was put in place, some corners of the turret were actually hitting the welds that were sculpted into the top deck and destroying them. So to prevent this from happening, I went ahead and resculpted the welds along the edge of the armor plate, which coincidentally is more as per the real vehicle. The way the locks engage on the hull is that the turret has to be turned sideways for the tank's turret to slip out. This is, of course, you don't want to have it the other way, because if the tank's turret is straight, you don't want the turret to pop off. To install the turret, it's as simple as such. Just line up the two locking tabs, drop it in, and twist. And there we have it. The turret is secured to the hull securely, spins freely, and if you notice, there's no lateral twist whatsoever because of those two little sheet styrene strips that I mentioned earlier. Finally, the last bit of detail that was added was the addition of the tank's key locking mechanisms. This one here was molded into the hatch, and rather than having to scratch build a new one, I just went ahead and reused it. German tanks had a small little key that would unlock the hatch from the deck. The key itself was covered up by the small little pivotable little plate, and the plate itself was restricted for movement via this little latch over here. To get access to the key, to the keyhole that is, you would flip this out of the way, thus relieving the keyhole for you to open up the hatch. This small little detail was added to this small hatch in the back, the engine hatch, and the front transmission hatch here. And that concludes this video update for this 1/6 scale German Panzer II Ausf. Stay tuned for more progress, and don't forget to check out eastcoastarmory.com for more builds and more detailed components. Thank you.